Welcome to the Building Efficiency Resources Podcast, the BERcast. We're back for another episode here focused on the world of multifamily construction and some of the good things that we're seeing in the marketplace as home energy raters and some of the challenges that we continue to see. No matter how many times we reinforce the same best practices, we have to learn the hard lessons with a lot of these projects and our clients and project teams. So we're here with a seasoned crew of veterans within the multifamily space. We have the co-principal of Eco Achievers, Lindsey Elton. She is a BER rater based in my hometown, Detroit, Michigan. Eco Achievers has some offices in other places, though. We'll get to that in a second. Then we've got Steve Klocke with SWA, Stephen Winters Associates. That sounds real cool when you say it like that. Stephen Winters obviously has had representation on the BERcast before with our dear colleague, the greatest technical mind in the industry, Gayatri Vijaya-Kumar. And then last but not least, we have BER's Green Build Department Manager, Maggie Leslie. She heads up our Lead for Homes providership, which disproportionately focuses on multifamily, as well as our Energy Star and DOE program, Multifamily Review Organization services. So we've got a broad swath of experience here on the BERcast today to talk about what is going on in the world of multifamily and how we can do better. Thanks, everybody, for being on here.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Right on. Steve, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and pick on you because you're the one who raised your hand. You listened to the BERcast, apparently. You heard a recent episode that we did with the grizzled old vets of the single family space. And you said, I really like that episode. It was great. I was like, okay, you're going to be on it now. So listen to the BERcast from time to time, I take it.
Absolutely. Yep. The one that episode in particular connected with me, just it seemed like every other minute that you guys were saying things, I was like, yep. And then there's also the personal side of things where I think one of your hosts was from Iowa. I'm from Iowa. I'm sorry, not your host, your guests. And then there was a connection to Georgia. I think one of your guests was from Georgia, where I had done weatherization work in Georgia. And what else? There was one other connection. We have a connection. We're both.
And Matt Rosenthal, who was the other guy.
Right. That's right. Yep. So anyway, and yeah, so it hit on a variety of levels.
It's great. So just so you all know, if you're listening to the BERcast and you reach out to your good buddy Chris Mack and say you liked it, I'm going to tell you, guess what? You're next. So be prepared. But it makes sense because our industry, especially I'd say in the last 10, 15 years, there's whole parts of our industry that are almost exclusively focused on multifamily and the application of home energy ratings and performance testing in the world of multifamily buildings. Stephen Winters and Eco Achievers, I would say disproportionately, a very high percentage of their work is on multifamily. Steve, just so if anyone doesn't know, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about SWA.
Sure. I am principal sustainability consultant in our multifamily, typically new construction group. We do ratings on multifamily buildings from up and down the East Coast, from Maine down to Maryland, Virginia. We have offices in Boston, here in Norwalk, Connecticut, where I am, New York City, and Washington, D.C. And yeah, affordable multifamily is our jam. That's what we, in our group at least, SWA does a variety of things, especially in New York City with regard to existing buildings. Lots of obviously multifamily there, as well as commercial and other types of buildings. And we also, so we're mostly sustainability focused, but we also have a very robust accessibility department, which is also, it's a different shade of nerdiness than the green stuff. But yeah, that's what my background is as an architect. I went to architecture school, Iowa State, got my license in 2006. And so, yeah, we also in New York City primarily support what they call TR8, which is just basically energy code compliance. In New York, you have to hire someone as a third-party verifier to check for building code compliance, which I think I want to talk about again later, because that's a big part that our industry doesn't get, is the value of third-party verification.
Definitely, let's talk more about that. Put a pin in it. Switching over to my good buddy Lindsey Elton. Lindsey and I go way back to practically the start of my career, right when BER was just a little seed in the ground. People didn't even know that it existed. It was that much of a seed in the ground. It hadn't even grown a shoot by the time that Lindsey and I had met there in good old Chi-Town. And both of us, look how far we've come. Lindsey, BER has really grown into a decent sized tree. And you went ahead and took a job with a company called Eco Achievers, and then you ended up buying that company. And now you are a principal of a really pretty dynamic organization focused principally here in the upper Midwest. But tell us a little bit about Eco Achievers.
Sure. It's been a little bit of a trip. We're a green building consulting firm. I run our Detroit office. We have our main office in Chicago. We've got, when we bought the company in 2019, and just a real fun, quick story. I was the guarantor on our business loan, and I was signing the documentation for it. I'm like, when is the world going to shut down and we won't be able to pay our bills? None of this will ever happen, right? Sure, I'll sign. There's 5 of us, all right, cool. And then COVID happens 6 months later. But anyway, yeah. So we focus primarily on multifamily green certifications. I think that's the absolute core of our business. It used to be a mix. We grew from the single family world and then got into multifamily shortly after as we began to grow. It used to be a mix between affordable and market rate. With the current climate and how in some of the HUD financing, our market rate world has diminished significantly. So now we're focusing primarily on affordable housing. But we're also, as we've changed, we're looking at the different services that we can provide, and we've gotten more into performance, like high performance testing, whole building testing. We've been really fortunate to do a lot of passive house work, some of the first projects in the Midwest in multiple states. And with that grew our experience with whole building door testing and on all different sizes of buildings, which has been super. And I will give a shout out to SWA that we always make sure that when we're talking to our projects, we pay tribute and give the multifamily air sealing guideline to literally to almost every single project. And those details are then in the plans. I'm so here's your guide. These are best practice guidelines. Because as Chris mentioned, here it's the learning curve is huge in order to get people to understand compartmentalization testing and what needs to happen in air sealing inside of the building as opposed to the exterior envelope. So
teaser alert, we're working on a newer version, one specifically for architects in CAD format, so they can just plunk them right down into their detail sheets, and then a 3D based printable guide for the people on site to.
That's awesome. I feel like right now it's obviously getting the plans on the details, but it's getting the contractors to understand, and it's the trades training. That's where we're at.
Great.
Yep. Appreciate that from Stephen Winters. Thank you so much for giving back to the industry. Lots to be learned from that organization because they've been around a really long time. How long has Stephen Winters been around? It's 40, 50 years or something like that, right?
I think it's since 1972. So what is that, 53 years?
Wow. Yeah. So that's incredible. And obviously, I don't know that energy stuff, was it the focus from the beginning? Do you know?
No, it was anything to do with building technology is how
Okay.
Steven started. And so they had any variety of topics that they focused on, such as modular building, log construction, all kinds of stuff. They've done, I should say we have done studies for all the different government agencies. And maybe I'm saying it in a different tense because it has changed. I've been at SWA for 15 years. And when I was hired, we still had a big chunk of government contracts to support any number of research topics. And we still have those, but the proportions have shifted. We don't have as much of those because there's just not as much to be had. So that air sealing guide, for example, is funded by, I think it was DOE Building America money. And it's not technically even ours. It belongs to everyone. We just got paid to
Thank you
develop
to
it.
the DO for hiring the right crew, regardless. And so, last but not least, we have Maggie Leslie, who is, again, our manager for our Greenville department. She manages our MRO services as well as Lead for Homes. Hey, Maggie, thanks for joining us. She's based down in Asheville, North Carolina. So, we got the Midwest represent with Lindsey, and we got the Northeast represent with Steve, and then we got the Southeast represent with Maggie. How you doing, Maggie?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Chris. It's my first BERcast. Yeah, I've been in the industry since about 2002-ish and
Did you get your start?
got my start at South Face Energy Institute as an intern.
Yeah,
Chris,
$100 a week.
was it that much? I don't even know.
Yeah, probably not for you. With inflation, by the time I started in 2009, we're getting $100 a week. So for you, it was probably more like 75.
Yes, I'm not sure, but I still feel like I do the same job. I just run a green building hotline here at Bear and answering random technical questions, which I think I still enjoy most about all the things that I do. It's like I do detective work most of the time, overlaying all the checklists and doing things like seeking out Steve's white paper research to help answer questions. But yeah, I mostly was in the single family world here in Asheville, Western North Carolina, ran a small nonprofit for about 20 years, did everything from the bookkeeping to writing the green building guidelines and doing the inspections and testing to growing with Lead. I ran Lead for Homes providership since it began, but really didn't get into multifamily as much until I joined Bear. They threw me into this MRO thing and I hit the ground running, figuring it out with everybody. I think all of us have been in it together, learning about these guidelines. So the transition from multifamily high rise, it's been fun. Thanks for having me.
And so that's where we'll get started here, which is just to show the Energy Star program. Let's do a little follow up here. Earlier this year, we had a call to action episode where we were encouraging people to really reach out to support Energy Star and particularly the 45L. And we were partially successful. The 45L is not long for this world, but it sounds, and I'm convinced it's because of that BERcast episode, that Energy Star, it seems like it's going to see another day. All those folks right now, they're probably out enjoying a day where they're not in the office because there's not much going on right now with the federal government. But it appears by all information we have today, cross our fingers, that Energy Star is going to continue to see another day, which is very important because I strongly believe in the program. I know a lot of people think a lot of different things about Energy Star, and particularly this multifamily new construction program. It hasn't been without its challenges of getting it fully off the ground. You know, there are some things that are just brand new. Let's just say that much to the world of especially HERS raters. Historically, where raters were implementing Energy Star in multifamily, it was basically taking the single family program and implementing it. There was a multifamily high rise program. It was probably used in some areas like New York City, I'd imagine, quite a bit. In other parts of the country, not so much. And so getting to know things like common space systems and how those need to be evaluated, that's all pretty brand new stuff for the world of raters. Some of the sort of the specifics about you can only keep your garage heated to 40 degrees and things like that. Those are some things that are certainly new to raters to have to communicate. So I think we could all probably over a case probably sit down and share some war stories of where it's worked and where it hasn't. But regardless, I consider Energy Star multifamily new construction to be definitely one of the success stories of helping to normalize the scope of work of HERS raters in the multifamily arena. We're now working on projects of any size. Whereas HERS raters historically, we were limited to 3 stories. That was way back in the day. And then it went up to 5 stories. And now, Lindsey, what's the tallest building that Eco Achievers has worked on and maybe applied HERS ratings or this type of protocol?
Yeah, I think we were slated for a 30 30-ish story building that has since gone on hold. I think typically we're looking in the high rise area. As you were mentioning, we used to be capped at 5 really, and that was because Energy Star at the time was only allowing with zero energy ready homes too. We could only do the HERS ratings for up to 5 stories, and that kind of limited us. And then now we've been using like ASHRAE, doing ASHRAE path, and that's really allowed us to go, 10, 13 stories. But I think, yeah, we're at the 30th is probably our top right now.
Yeah. Technically, ERI ratings or HERS ratings can be applied now to any size building. So even the 30-story building, technically you can do ERI scores, although as Lindsey's mentioned, her firm has realized that there might be some extra value in considering the more MRO paths, either through ASHRAE 90.1 modeling or through the prescriptive path. Don't sleep on the prescriptive path. That's all I'm going to tell people here. Don't sleep on it. It's potentially the easiest path of least resistance if your building otherwise complies. Steve, because in a lot of ways, Steve Winters, we're going to continue to give you your flowers because you all were pretty heavily involved in the creation of the multifamily high-rise program, and then also a technical expert that was helping the EPA in the implementation of multifamily new construction. Is that correct?
Yeah, until very recently, unfortunately.
Yeah, until any contract with anything that had to do with green or energy basically went away. We feel that pain. We had a couple of those, but yeah, tell us maybe a little bit about if you know the history of Steve Winters' basically focus with the Energy Star program. Tell us.
I think you've got the wrong SWA person. Gayatri is the person to talk to about that. I know that she had basically was instrumental in building the multifamily high-rise documentation, the Team V's, the Team V workbook, which we don't want to pull back the curtains too far here, but we give her grief all the time about, holy cow, you made that so aggressive. And
It's not just the rest of us.
no,
Okay.
no, it's
inside your own office. Okay. All right. So we all agree. All right. That sounds
Thank
good.
you
All
for that. That I'm at peace now.
the thing is, though, we've got her here where we can be like, okay, what was the intent here? And it's the same thing now with Energy Star multifamily new construction, where yeah, it's easy enough for me to walk a few feet over to her office, be like, okay, so here's what I'm understanding from this footnote for this criteria on et cetera, about what was meant by it, if there's any uncertainty. So she'll say, here's what the intent was, but I can't be the final say. You need to email the technical line and then go through the process and you'll get an official response. So that's what we do until recently, where now I think you probably know, but ResNet is providing some technical support. They're still getting the bugs worked out. But I actually just got email from Scott at ResNet last night in response to an inquiry we sent. So I don't want to I want to give kudos to ResNet and any other agency out there who has stepped forward to pick up the weight where the folks at EPA have been forced to drop it. So good on y'all for doing that. So yeah, and Gayatri is also, she helped EPA develop the multifamily new construction program, which, like you said, Chris, is basically a spin-off of the original single family Energy Star program, just redone to apply to any size of building. But yeah, I think I don't know what our tallest is right now. We've got a FIAS project in Brooklyn at 62 stories. And to your point about the prescriptive path, Chris, that's what we found for a FIAS project, which requires ERH, which requires Energy Star and IAP. We do prescriptive path for everything except FIAS, because performance-wise, nothing's going to be more rigorous. And yeah, we found that to be the sweet spot for big buildings.
Yeah, we're seeing
Don't sleep on it.
We're seeing a lot of that because the FIAS alternative doesn't seem to be, it seems easier to do the prescriptive path than the FIAS alternative path, meeting that 20% improvement over source energy for Energy Star, that they've made it harder than FIAS. Has been a challenge for a lot of projects, a lot of FIAS projects struggling with that.
Yeah, so just kind of looking at, and again, the BERcast listeners are a broad base of listeners. Not everybody is a multifamily expert, so we're getting into some of the backpack kid, real nerdy stuff here, and we will continue to. But for the folks who are maybe just dipping their toes in the water of the multifamily world, basically the and I'm focusing on Energy Star just because again it I consider it to be the first best step that you can take. And obviously there's a whole world of just building code out there, and I'm excited to talk a little bit with Steve about his experience with being a third party verifier for that. The challenge, I think, is in the residential space, raters are called upon pretty frequently in order to do some degree of third party verification of energy code. But then you start to get into a multifamily building, really of any size, even when it's 3 stories and under, and it technically is supposed to fall under the residential code, tend to find that compliance and knowledge of what needs to be verified really falls off with the building code pretty dramatically. And a lot of it just turns into a lot of engineer and architect sign offs. I think that is going to be less and less the case as the energy code continues to improve here. I'm focused on Energy Star because, for all intents and purposes, for our industry, that meaning HERS raters, this is kind of like the first seat at the table that we've really had where we're being asked to be involved specifically in testing and verification and even potentially energy modeling for these projects. Even with the legacy high rise project program, it was pretty ambiguous about who could be involved in that.
Yeah, you didn't have to be a HERS rater to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody could.
Yeah. And so now, I think the program wisely said, while there certainly are certain subsects of professionals that, especially in your major metros with really big buildings, there are envelope commissioning and HVAC commissioning professionals that certainly would have been comfortable doing a lot of this testing and verification. I think it was wise for the EPA to pivot and be a little bit more specific about credentials that would be appropriate for the program. And so it's a big opportunity for us. And even though the 45L is shifting away, the reality is I don't know that the 45L was quite as big of a deal for multifamily once you really did the math. The reality is that a lot of affordable housing developments to take advantage of it would be non-traditional in terms of their financing stack. Not impossible, but non-traditional. Really, the decent money really only came once you were, having prevailing wages. So, the loss of 45L, I don't think is quite as big of a deal. I do think some of the HUD financing, though, is a bigger one. We'll come back to you on that, Lindsey. But, where this is a big deal is in affordable housing. Most states around the country have QAPs, so basically they're programmatic design that have green policies that specify some degree of energy efficiency program needing to be met. That's not every state, but I would say most of them, or at least a lot of them. And Energy Star is kind of one of those first big thresholds. It's not the only one. Obviously, the other big one would be like NGBS, and we'll talk some shop about the differences there. But to me, Energy Star is sort of the first best step forward. And it's got some devil in the details that makes it tricky, especially when, you're talking to a design team that's never really worked within it. But, the value proposition that I see is that it's pretty comprehensive. It has very clear scopes for dwelling unit best practices, as well as that for common spaces that use energy. And we can see that over time, that just like with the single family program, the multifamily program is getting more stringent over time. We can now see that there's about 10 states that are in the pipeline for implementation of version 1.2. So nationally, we're on 1.1. That gives us a baseline of being 15% better than the 2016 ASHRAE 90.1. There is an ERI method, and there's also a prescriptive method. I'm not going to necessarily go through every single bullet of those tables, but essentially, a code that's almost 10 years old, you have to be better than that. So that's pretty good. And ASHRAE, 90.1 2016 is pretty good. Now we're on version 1.2. A lot of states are moving to it. Now you have to be 15% better than the 2019. And nobody yet is on 1.3, but it has been defined as being 15% better than the 2022 standards. So we are moving the thresholds further. And I'm going to kick this back over to Maggie, just because you oversee our MRO department, and BER is, I guess, I don't know, I'm just going to go as far as to say we're the biggest MRO in the country. I don't know if that's true, but I believe it. I believe it in my heart that we are. And if we're not the biggest, we're the best. And you know why? Because of Maggie Leslie. She is amazing. She has been just so focused in getting this program right and helping out our raters who are participating in this program. So Maggie,
Yeah, I will
what do
champion
you
that as a rater. I swear I feel like for a time I had Maggie on speed dial, and I know that the rest of our team did too. I can't say enough about how valuable and important she is and how much she's helped for so many different projects. Thank you, Maggie.
given a big bouquet here of all those
Bouquet of
flowers?
love.
So Maggie, what are you seeing in terms of challenges, broad strokes? Obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of devil in the details, but broad strokes. Is it the increasing efficiency, stringency that may be coming from these advancing programmatic versions, or have you not really started to see that yet in terms of 1.2 and 1.3, or is it really the devil in the details of the testing and inspections that seem to catch people with Energy Star?
First, I want to say, Lindsey, it has been my pleasure to get to work with your team. You're all so wonderful and just really raise the bar on your attention to detail and how hard y'all work on these projects. I think most of what I know comes from the questions that y'all ask. So we're all learning this together. But I think my investment has paid off in time, because you do ask less questions now than you used to. We're getting this down. So it's interesting. We have a couple shifts going on right now. 90.1 2016, yes, is tied to version 1.1, but that really just came out with revision 5. Revision 4 and prior, you were looking at 15% better than whatever the state commercial code was in the area. So in Colorado, it's still just 15% better than 2007 until next year when revision 5 hits. So is states like New York that have already adopted higher energy codes, where we've been seeing these 90.116 projects, and then these FIAS projects that are required to do version 1.2 now to meet ZRH, where we're seeing 90.1 2019. It really hasn't been too heavy of a lift in some places, but the fuel neutral calculation that came out with revision 5 has really changed the game, because all electric buildings were really struggling to be modeled against a gas baseline. And so we were seeing a lot of buildings, particularly in the states that hadn't adopted advanced energy codes, really struggling to get beyond 2016. But the fuel neutral calculator, like, we're just seeing these come in, but they're going from 4 and 5% improvement based on source energy to flying past the target at 20% when translated to fuel neutral savings. So that is promising that it's going to help buildings get there. I don't necessarily know how that math works, but it is helping. 2019 is going to be harder, and we are seeing a lot of performance targets that are coming in right at the bare minimum. And I think that's also, you mentioned the 45L loss. It was transitioning. 45L was going to transition to version 1.2 as the minimum for multifamily buildings being done in 2027 anyway. And so I think that we were going to see a decline in 45L projects being able to meet that anyway. So I don't think it's going to be the biggest, as big of a loss as it may have been because of that. But yeah, I do think that 15% above 2019 is going to be ambitious for a lot of projects. But so far, the fuel neutral calculation is really helping us get there. And then in addition, with revision 5, having removed a lot of the minimum thermal bypass requirements has really opened up flexibility that maybe it'll make it worth it if they're not spending so much on some of these little details and they're able to invest it into higher efficiency mechanical equipment. Not that we want the loss of the building envelope to be the expense, but there are tricky details that people were spending a lot of time, energy, and money on that it's nice to be able to trade off now.
Part of my spiel that I give to architects when they're wondering what can be done better is you guys have backed yourselves into a corner with these details where the building envelope jogs in and out. And instead of having a nice, simple cube, which I realize is maybe not what an architect wants to deliver, they want something more exciting. All these balconies and these setbacks of courtyards above a podium, and then the wood frame building. There's all these details that they've made themselves have to address because of how they made decisions early in the design process with the building geometry, right? So if they had known ahead of time how hard their lives would be down the road as they're working out the details and trying to get, I guess, if Energy Star compliance as far as thermal bridging goes, if they had known, they probably would have made different decisions early on with the shape of the building to, oh, maybe we should line up these exterior walls with these below grade walls rather than having it jump back or blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I just want jump in is that's a big thing that is tough to get through to design teams.
It absolutely is. And I think it'll continue to be a challenge. But now I feel like there's more pressure on you, Lindsey and Steve, to model it correctly and to do these calculations correctly, because it was easier just to make them insulate it. Whereas now we have to figure out how to calculate the thermal bypass of that terrible design decision. Not terrible. I'm sure it's going to be beautiful.
Not terrible, but just uninformed.
Yeah, challenging design decision.
And I have to give kudos to our team because they're the ones that are now getting into the mud of all of that and working through those details. But I did want to speak just a little bit to Maggie, what you're saying about the source neutral. And we ran into that. And Chris, you were mentioning the QAP in Illinois. They were incentivizing all electric buildings and like Enterprise Green Communities, which utilizes Energy Star. And so we had and Illinois is in the 2021 IECC. And we ran into like specifically with a couple projects that were all electric because they were trying to get the points for their LIHTC funding. And they had fairly decent buildings, but we were just running into compliance issues with Energy Star because of that inability to use the fuel neutral calculator. But now that we can, the story has changed. So it's been this evolution. And I will agree that there has been this relaxation of the thermal bridging, allowing us to do the UA calculation, which has really helped because it's been tricky. It's been tricky. So anyway.
Yeah, so for those who typically come from the single family world, it may be hard to empathize with this just because, believe it or not, building enclosures tend to be more rigorous in single family homes in net oftentimes than in larger buildings, because larger buildings tend to have more structural bridging type of issues. There's a lot more concrete and steel when you get into these larger buildings, and the fenestration packages are not necessarily NFRC rated window systems. Some of them are, but you get a lot more sort of site built fenestration as well, that in net tends to be a little bit less. That depends, but not always superlative in terms of a lower U factors and things like that. Lindsey, I'm interested to know from you, because Steve and his team, they created of these programs and they used their knowledge transfer from experience with third-party energy code verification in New York City that has a pretty progressive energy code, and a lot of research dollars from NYSERDA and things like that. Lindsey, you're a market rate HERS rating company that, you forgive me if I'm wrong, but a lot of this stuff was trial by fire, right? You didn't necessarily know yourself. You're not a licensed architect. You're not a professional engineer. You're just a HERS rater, kind of like me. And you had to be forced to learn a lot about these larger buildings. What was one of the bigger challenges, or a handful of challenges, going from more of that single family green building mindset to higher performance multifamily buildings?
I think some of the challenges, at least that and some of it may be just from a personal perspective. I can call myself a nerd at times, a little anal retentive. And I want specificity of, all right, we're out there and I don't know all the ins and outs. A lot of times, like, this was the first time for us experiencing this type of structure. Like, lessons learned now, I'm like, oh, okay, now I know that they're problematic with this thermal bridging in this particular area. But at that time, we didn't. And so we would get in the middle of something and be like, oh shit, wish I would have known that, but I didn't know that because there really wasn't anything to look back upon. So it was a trial by fire, I would say, too, with some of the programs. And so what I mean by I'm my particular personality is I'm looking for, all right, I'm here trying to enforce as well these guidelines. There is no clear indication or no clear path of this particular assembly. Steve, as you were mentioning, like, people aren't just building boxes. So how do we handle this? So it's like, Maggie, how do we interpret this right now? Because there's some big gaps between how we're supposed to do something and what the program actually says. And I would say, like, earlier versions, as I mentioned, we've been really active with FIAS. And I think that even they would say sometimes we're building the program or building the track as the train is going. And I'm like, what do you want? What do you want us to do here? I don't know what we're supposed to.
I can speak to that firsthand. As the principal author of the FIAS multifamily standard, I can speak definitively that we were building it as we were going down the track. I at least tried to put something in writing to make it more clear what was supposed to be done. But absolutely, like you and Rob Hoskin and people like Earth Advantage, they were out there doing these multifamily passive buildings and applying what they knew from the single family context to these larger buildings. And then, yeah, we had to figure out all the rest of it about how to make an actual defensible standard.
I remember calling you on one of my first multifamily passive house whole building blower door tests, and the program kept shutting down and I couldn't like I was there and we did a mid-construction blower door test and we passed with flying colors, and then I'm there at final and we have everybody like standing around waiting for me to conduct this blower door,
Looking over your shoulder.
and it
Yeah.
the program keeps shutting down and I have no idea. Come to find out that we've got like dampers that are closing that we weren't aware of, or I didn't know. So it was just like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That training wasn't there. So I had to move doors and it was windy outside. So it was just like all of this storm of learning lessons that the industry as a whole at that point didn't know. So yeah, so it's been a challenge. And now we've gotten more formal instruction and we've been a part of different research initiatives. And so we've built that muscle. And so now we do know with confidence, okay, we have to look out for this. All right, this is what we have to be prepared for. We need to make sure that there's no pressure bottlenecks, like all this type of stuff. And that just wasn't there, or that was maybe there for a super niche group, but that wasn't there for our training as a professional.
Right. Definitely not covered in the HERS training.
No,
5-day course.
not so much.
Yeah, and I will say this continues to be, I think, a challenge for our industry about appropriate credentialing, because I think it's great that Energy Star pushed for HERS raters to be involved in this program. But I will say, I think it's optimistic to believe that raters are prepared to do duct leakage testing on whole building ventilation shafts. The high rise program had spec that exhaust risers. So for buildings that use central exhaust systems, if you're not familiar with multifamily, especially an older school design, was send a big giant shaft down to the center of the building, and that's where you're dumping your bathroom exhaust and your kitchen exhaust in from there. And it's kind of like, you ever been to a hotel and you're in the bathroom and there's a vent and it's doing something, but it's definitely not getting rid of the humidity very well. That's an exhaust riser. And the problem with exhaust risers is they're like any other piece of ductwork. They're prone to being installed poorly and not sealed. And so the program required under the high rise program to test exhaust risers and to have a leakage threshold that was acceptable, and it could be done at rough. This was then interpreted in multifamily new construction to also apply to essentially any type of whole building ventilation system. And I got to admit, I've pushed back a little bit just because, as a provider, just because I think it's a stretch that your average HERS rater is ready to go and do this type of whole building duct testing. And if we are expecting that, I think it's even a stretch that anybody is able to do it, to be honest. Yeah, there are certain sort of classifications of commercial air balancers that they have high pressure duct testing rigs, and they do commercial duct testing. That's not a standard most places. And I don't even know that there's a specific credential that one can earn for that kind of a thing. So we're interpolating commercial based standards and applying them to these larger multifamily residential buildings, and then asking HERS raters to take their tools and experience and apply it. Hey, the duct blaster from TEC, it only goes up to so much flow, but also it's sensitive to back pressure. And it's a questionable whether or not at those types of high flows, whether or not should be working. But Steve, I'm going to go back to because you're in the bridge there. Like, you don't live in New York City, but you work in the city, or at least your organization does. But you live in Connecticut. Stephen Winters, you do projects in Rochester, New York, which is practically like the Midwest compared to New York City. How do you feel about this sort of translatability of skill sets? And to a certain extent, you have the advantage of working with such a long tenured firm and a lot of veteran professionals where you can draw a lot of internalized knowledge. But how do you feel about a practitioner like Lindsey having to kind of like level up from single family raider mode to go test a big giant exhaust shaft mode?
I think it's just part of the deal, honestly. And I'll push back again on a bit on you saying it's beyond a HERS rater's capabilities to do central exhaust duct leakage testing. I think it's just like doing a whole building blower door test for passive house, for example. Or I think anybody can learn it. I think if the industry isn't providing the level of training that practitioners need, then you need to respond to that. And so I think we have training.
I am not saying, and anybody who knows me, I don't back down from no challenge. So I 100% agree with you that raiders
Yes.
can be upskilled
Mhm.
for this.
Absolutely.
What I am saying, though, is going back to Lindsey's point about appropriate training and credentialing, is we're asking people to go out there and essentially, with relatively limited guidance, go and kick ass at something like this and to do it uniformly on something that, by the way, will never be able to be QA'd.
But
Like, you'll
Well,
never be able to QA after the fact exhaust riser testing.
I was just going to say, in Energy Star's defense in this, and I do know that it is Stephen Winters that did most of the research on how important this is and what an energy loss it is.
And it is important.
Which I only know
It
from
is
Googling.
important.
But
It is important. And I want to say, as the guy who wrote the FIAS multifamily standard, I included the heavy recommendation to do this test. Not a requirement, but a heavy recommendation. Go
well,
ahead.
Chris, I'm going to tell you, anything that you recommend, a builder is going to say, do I have to do it or not? And if we tell them it's recommended, they're like, oh, the answer is no, I don't have to do it. Thanks anyway.
So
I hear you,
on the
Maggie.
Energy Star side, there is a subtle distinction in this requirement. It is not a rater measured item. It is a rater verified item, but anybody that the rater deems qualified can do that test, and the rater can check off that it was done and they feel confident that it was done correctly. So in some respects, they have made it possible to allow the testing and balancing contractors to do this. But I will say, in my experience, like one of, I guess, my surprises through this is how much terrible information we've gotten from testing and balancing contractors.
Right.
It's just having the raters go in and measure this stuff, and they're like, but it's passing the testing and balancing contractor's report. Do you really need me to sign off on it too? And the answer is absolutely yes, because
So I guess
much more-
I support yet push back on I'm on both sides of this right now because I 100% believe that we as raters are absolutely capable. We have not been given the training. This is not, and Steve, I feel like with all 100% due respect that your company and organization has been like at the forefront for over 50 years and has had this experience. And you guys are doing like crazy ass shit, which is incredible. We seriously look up to you. We just want, I guess this is a call, right? So that we could have more training to be able to do this kind of stuff. And Maggie, to your point, for the testing and balancing agents, like when we're shadowing testing and balancing agents, like some of them do a great job and some of them have huge holes of knowledge, like gaps. And so like we can't, and the type of equipment that they're using and the standards that we have to be within and the protocols. So there's this like sweet spot or whatever that's like the rater, we have to do it. Like we're the ones that are signing on this, and you can't rely on another industry professional. I guess like at me as a professional in our company, we like stand behind our work. So I want to make sure that we're understanding what we're doing and that the results, we're doing this with integrity and we're submitting everything. And that's just, we're in this learning phase era.
Well, and I'll also just say, as an organization that is a quality assurance organization, whenever you have a big ticket item that costs a lot of money to implement and nobody can ever QA it after the fact, I'm concerned it leads to inconsistency in the marketplace because there are a lot of carpet bagging multifamily raters out there. There's a lot of raters, and look, with all due respect, me and Lindsey and her company, they do a fair amount of outstate type of work and things like that. So I think there's a way to do it. But let's just say I am aware of some instances of companies that have, let's just say, shaved some of their work scope because they're flying from southern Ohio to upstate Wisconsin. And look, man, that's a big long drive or it's a costly flight. It's hard to get to Madison really with a flight. You gotta go into Chicago and then you gotta go to Madison. Man, it'd be easier for us to just shave a couple of inspections. And that's what we find sometimes. And I would just say programmatically, I've found that the response to those challenges of market consistency from the EPA to be fairly weak, and from ResNet for that matter. And so that's where it comes from. But let's focus on the positive here. We are making progress. This program is pushing us forward. It is pushing our skill sets forward. It is expecting us to know more about buildings and how they work and how they don't work. And that's a great opportunity. And I'm, as many people know, through my position on the ResNet board of directors, I've been a huge advocate for raters to be recognized more for their role in third-party verification within the energy code space. And I'm not interested in just resting our laurels on single family applications. I want to take on multifamily and even some degree of commercial verification. Why? Because those buildings are even worse than single family homes when it comes to third party verification and ensuring that the buildings actually perform as they were expected to. There is not really a HERS rater type of professional that works on these projects by and large, at least on a national level. But so, Steve, given that you have expressed that in New York City, there is more of an expectation of third party verification, what do you think something like that could look like? And do you think that would help to maybe resolve some of Lindsey's and maybe even my concerns about just trying to shoehorn single family raters into this? Does this give us an avenue for potentially creating either an upskilled credential or a brand new credential, something that's less than a professional engineer, but something that's more than just a regular old rater? What do you think?
Oh gosh, I'll preface my response by saying I'm a soldier in this fight, not a general. I guess I'll say Gayatri, for example, is a better big picture thinker than I might be. But to give you an actual answer to your question, yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity for a credential that is above a single family HERS rater, but not quite up at an engineer level. I think that's actually where we operate primarily. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's a matter of semantics, how you want to define it. And as far as education goes, again, if there's a need, it's got to be expressed and responded to. And yeah, being on the board, someone like you would have a lot more pull there than I would.
I'd
But I
like to
will
think.
say, can I go back to central duct leakage testing for a second?
You
We
want
did
to?
record a video. There is a training, and here's a problem. I'm putting a spotlight on myself, not in a positive way right now. We recorded a video, a whole training of how to do central exhaust duct leakage testing. I don't know where it is. I don't know. I don't know who we did it for, and where it's saved in our tetrabytes or whatever of network capacity here, storage. So
Steve, I think to that point though, like honestly, just give us we just need the training and we need hands-on training. Like the videos are wonderful, but we need hands-on training in buildings, right? So where things go awry because nothing's ever, or what's worse is like, all you have to do, okay, so you set up the equipment and then you turn it on and look, you've got a perfectly passing number.
and there's a million things that have happened for you
Fantastic.
that could
Yeah,
pop.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so take us into a scenario where we can be in a
Yeah,
few different size buildings to have
yeah.
that experience under our belts and then take us up. And that's with a whole bunch of stuff. I think we're like we just want to do the best job possible and videos are wonderful for a start, but we really
Yeah.
like we're raiders. We want to get our hands dirty. We need to.
Yeah, I think you have hands-on training and then you have the videos to go back to when 6 months have gone back and you need to remind yourself how to do this. I want to say to go back and toot Bear's shoehorn, I guess, is that one of the reasons I think we are the best MRO is because we are the only MRO that are HERS providers too, where we are actually raters ourselves and are really coming at it from that angle. So we see these holes and we understand them. And we're working really hard to support the raters from that perspective. But Chris, I was wondering, like, so I know that there was this push when we switched to allowing high-rise buildings to have HERS ratings in general. There was this kind of ResNet required multifamily training, which really just went through the ResNet standard changes, but it did have some helpful information. And theoretically, this was a required video that raters had to watch to be able to rate projects above 3 stories. And I think that the only people that take it now are FIAS verifiers that see it on the FIAS website as a required training and reach out and ask me what it is. But FIAS does have a level 1 and a level 2 for their raters, but I've not been through that training. Is that cover more multifamily?
And I think as the guy who designed it and was the main instructor for most of the time that it's been around, although I've lovingly passed the torch off to my colleagues, Natasha Brooks and Tony Lasanti, who are going to carry that torch forward for the FIAS verifier and rater training. Yeah, the verifier training does intend to prepare people for what they're going to get themselves into. But I think what Lindsey is asking for, and I agree with, is we need something that's more tactile in nature. We need people to be able to have more of an evocation of their senses of what the stakes are, what the sort of the critical impasses are with these types of buildings and how they may work and how they may fail and how to then troubleshoot them if you are running into issues. And it can be from a testing or an inspection side. And if it's testing, it could be really, frankly speaking, whole building blower door testing, whole building duct leakage testing, as well as ventilation verification, because all of those become really sticky wickets to a certain extent when you get into these larger building programs. Interestingly enough, Energy Star did not pull the trigger on a whole building blower door test, which personally I actually think is, I think it's a little bit of a weakness of the program, I guess I could say. We want to push people towards these more prolific energy standards, but we're still not going to hold them accountable for a whole building air tightness test. I don't know about that. We're going to make people do whole building duct leakage testing when we don't even really have equipment that really is meant to go to that type of pressure or capacity, and we're going to make people use it anyways, but we're not going to allow people to do blower door testing when we have the equipment. So a little bit of general pushback whenever they go back to work. Hopefully they listen to this episode, and maybe for version 2 multi MFNC will have the requirement for a whole building blower door test, because I do think that this testing and verification is the next nexus here. I do think it's where the real work gets done. And I think that's where these buildings get made or broken. Lindsey, think about going over to your passive house work. What's the number one thing that you see end up having a hard time in those buildings?
The two that have the most issues are the whole building blower door testing and then testing and balancing. And it's and ventilation testing.
Exactly.
And it's so interesting because we try to do the preparatory work with the mechanical teams, with the testing and balancing agent. Everybody, okay, we know they know the protocol, but we've run into so many issues with dampers and with not achieving not like VE process where dampers are taken out and you have them going. So for people that aren't working with FIAS for multifamily projects, requirement of the program anyway is to have your supply ventilation into every bedroom. So you've got dampers into the units, but then if you've got like a whole building ERV or ERU, and you've got multiple floors and it's going down multiple floors, and you really need dampers, floor by floor dampers to control that. You need to be able to have what we've learned now, and we're not engineers, but the ductwork that's going horizontally across an entire floor, you can't just have the same size ductwork. It does need to have a reduction because pressure needs to be able to,
Are your engineers not catching
the
that?
engineers aren't catching that. We get to a point where we're testing, right? And we're not able to meet the really low flows that are required for the bedrooms. And you've got commercial testing and balancing agents. And so in order to get the certification, like sometimes you have to break drywall, and it's just a mess sometimes. And that's like the one part that seems like, oh, this should be really easy, testing and balancing. This is what you guys do. These are kind of commercial buildings, but it's not. So that's one thing. So Chris, that is a huge thing. And then to start off, and I can't remember if we were recording at this point, like design issues that we're seeing, just whole building blower door testing. And what I wish you would know, or what I wish you would see, is just the air barrier, like continuity of the air barrier among all transition points. Like that's what it is. You don't need fancy materials or products. You just need to make sure that it's intact, it's done right, and that's it.
Go ahead and switch gears here and maybe just drop the knowledge here. So part of, Steve, why you're on this episode is that you reached out and said you listened to the last one, you really liked it, and you mentioned that there was this top 10 multifamily design mistakes. And I'm just going to make a plug here for Stephen Winter's Academy. You can go ahead and take this lesson for a mere $45. It's 5-star rated. Look at that, with 1 grade. But hey, look,
that wasn't me, I promise.
Yeah. So maybe just because, man, I said that we're not going to get into the nitty gritty details, that we'd have to wait until we get a case of beers for it. I guess we should have been early drinkers today, because we really did go down that rabbit hole. Going back to big picture, these top 10 design mistakes, what's some of the wisdom that you're imparting in this training here, Steve, that we can pick up on?
First of all, it's oriented toward architects and engineers. So it's oriented toward designers. There's plenty, we could go on and on as far as implementation goes, but where I start with the presentation that I give in a variety of conferences and etc., early decisions in the design process have a snowball effect, right? So you make a decision early in the process as you are doing your schematic design, and then that decision has an impact in design development, and it has even more of an impact in the construction document phase. And then it's got an impact in the construction phase. And then that's just the tip of the iceberg. Then you've got the next 50 to 100 years that building's going to be operating, that the building's going to be affected by that decision you as an architect or an engineer made early on. And so the point is to think about that and make those decisions where they're going to make your life easier and make everybody else's life easier in the process, make the building better, rather than trying to make the building exciting looking or any aesthetically subjective driven decision. Don't let it have an oversized impact on objective things like the building's got to stand up. The building's got to resist water. The building's got to conserve energy. The building's got to be comfortable. It's got to be durable. It's got to be affordable. Don't build surprises into your design. Build predictability into your design. So that's the biggest takeaway that I'd like, especially architects, to get is don't back yourself into a corner with your design. Make good design decisions early. And they're cheaper. Design decisions, any decision is cheaper early in the process. When decisions are most expensive, when you've got dozens of people on the construction site, everybody is scrambling to get the project done by a certain date, and oops, we missed something, or oops, this is a lot harder than we thought it was going to be. And the clock is ticking, the cash register is ching as you're trying to figure this out. So yeah, an hour in the office is worth a week in the field, let's say.
Yeah, Lindsey, from your experience, what are some of these kind of, just if you had to pass on a couple kernels of wisdom for anybody jumping into multifamily, maybe for the first time, how would you recommend that they approach it?
I was planning on just commenting on what Steve was saying.
Go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
I think more of it is the timing that we're brought into the conversation. The earlier, the better. So as Steve was mentioning in schematics, that's the time that we need to have the conversations about here's all the requirements and certification requirements. And here's what, go build your building, but here's what the parameters that we have to work on in order, because we're brought into these now, typically affordable housing projects, because funding is contingent on achieving these certifications or this energy performance, right? Or code compliance or what have you, this incentive. So here are your list of requirements. Let's go through. Is there anything that seems problematic with what your design intent is, your basis of design? Let's talk about them now so that, again, we're not either even later on in design, we can talk about that now, and there's not all the rework from the design side in order for you to achieve all of these. So I think, and for project teams, sometimes, and like specifically with Passive House, there's a misunderstanding that it's just the whole building blower door. And there's so many other programs, obviously, that are involved in it, and just really getting us involved because we want to support you. We don't want you to struggle. We don't want to struggle. So nobody wants to struggle, because what happens is we don't get the certification and then everybody looks at us. No one wins. So it's just an uncomfortable and preventable conversation or scenario. And then I do want to go back, Steve, like the comment that I made about the ductwork not tapering down. That was like a one-off scenario that went bad. The majority of, the grand majority. This was one that I was just thinking of recently, and like that was a pain point.
That crazy stuff happens though.
Yep.
Maggie, from your perspective, just seeing a lot of these projects that come in, that I know you've said before, you hate giving people bad news, but it seems like sometimes you have to be the bearer of bad news. How can people maybe set themselves up for success? Is it a design thing? Is it the approach of the rater to get their heads all the way screwed on about what their full work scope is, or a combination of both?
Say it's a combination of both. I think we are seeing projects come in earlier now, especially that the program has been around a little bit longer. There is some sense of starting earlier. Now that the slab edge insulation question can be put behind us because there are options for that, because that was definitely one of the bears of bad news there, was because it's something you can't change, right? You cannot fix that at the end if it was missed. And so that's just been a huge challenge point. But now that we have options to pivot, if that is the case, right now, I'd say the biggest kind of stumbling blocks we're seeing projects have, and to Lindsey's point, it's kitchen ventilation projects really, and that's probably because I don't deal with FIAS projects that have to have whole blower door tests. So the next tier is the kitchen ventilation, figuring out that design. We still have a lot of projects that even undercut their doors to the corridor. That's been a real problem, particularly for like dorms. We have dorms and shelter type structures that often are using door undercuts to ventilate the building. So that one's been a challenge for a lot of people, but that's just good design. So yeah, starting early is and getting the rater involved early and taking the time to read the documents. It really does come down to that. Architects and engineers are confident in what they're doing. Most of them do know what they're doing and they think they're building a great building, but taking the time to find the documents on the website, get a hold of them. That's really a huge part of what we do, is helping connect people with where to find the requirements, but going through them piece by piece. I do wish Energy Star had a little better of a kind of a design review checklist, even if it's just an optional one for designers, because right now the Rater design review checklist, there's a huge optional section that says things like review all the requirements on the entire Rater field checklist. So it's like, oh, there's another 3 pages of documents that are just a reference plus the footnotes. So it's definitely on my wish list.
I'll tell you, I agree with everything you just said. And I also think that it's not going to happen to get as an architect, I know like the energy piece of the pie is so small compared to everything else they need to worry about. We try to take sort of an AI approach where we'll boil down for the team what are the big items to get them started in the right direction, and then go down to the next level and the next level until we're finally down to the fine-tooth comb level where we've checked every spec section and every drawing sheet to make sure everything is in there. And then that's only half the battle, because you have to restart that process again during construction. So yeah, but that's the value, I think, of what we do, is that third-party verification doesn't only happen in the field, it happens in the design phase as well. Because there's no way you're going to have success in the construction phase if you don't have design documentation that's up to snuff. So yeah, the value of what we do spans, I think, the entire process. And we do have clients and team members that really do appreciate us and recognize our value, and that's really nice. And then it becomes more of a partnership, and then you get momentum going. And basically the whole point of all these programs is transforming the industry, right? And we transform it as we go. And so I take a lot of joy in that. It makes me feel good to be able to say, okay, that team did a crap job this time, but guess what? They're going to do a better job next time. And then on it goes.
Absolutely.
Lindsey, do you feel that love too? Do you feel that love from your project teams?
I don't know if I would necessarily generalize that statement, but I can say that from a recent passive house project, we had a team, and the site super, he's at the beginning of this project, we were like, what is this stuff that we're doing? And then all of a sudden the building's performing different and it feels different. And he's, yes. And it was like this aha moment. And I'm like, yes, this is it. And it ended up being like, it was a success story. Like he built it, and his team, to kudos to all of them, because it's everyone. Everyone has to be on board, right? There is no unimportant person on the team. Everyone has to be mindful, specifically with FIAS projects and the exterior envelope, and they rocked it. And so it was just like, right on, you guys. That's what it's about.
Hopefully that will spread too. They'll spread that on to others, and that's how we change the industry.
So for all the times that you've like in painstaking detail been like, this is what you have to do, and they just don't listen or pay attention, and then you have those like handful of ones that got through, and you're like, all right, that's it. So worth it.
Hey, like Sisyphus, we get stronger as we go up the hill. each and every single pass, and we keep feeling like we're going to get to the point where we're going to push it up over that ledge and we'll be good to go. Maybe one of those days. Now, we focused this episode a little bit on the higher end side of multifamily, but that's good. We'll probably have to have the crew back at some point to talk about what's going on. I don't want to say lower end, but I don't know. I got a salty attitude about NGBS and to a lesser extent LEED. Maybe that's wrong for me to feel that way, but they're not hers enough. They need to lean into what we do more, except for whole building exhaust riser testing. Because Steve, it's all good.
Today's last day of the verifier retreat for NGBS. Maybe someone will tune into this on the way home.
Hey, Lindsey, go tell them what it is. We are going to wrap it up here. We've had a nice long conversation here on the BERcast about multifamily, some of the design and implementation challenges, but we're going to keep moving forward. Thank you all to our guests. We will see you on the next episode. Have a good week.
Thanks,
Yes.
y'all.